Here we are at last. We're at our end game. We've got all our parts prepped and our electronics working. It's now time to finish, paint, and assemble the Dredd Lawgiver. And after that, I'm going to show you some easy techniques you can use to weather your Lawgiver using that one. And finally, I'm going to show those aspiring machinists how they can machine their own metal barrel, which I stress is completely optional, using some 3D printed templates. And then get this one, the last of my RPF run, all boxed up for its new owner, Adam Savage. So let's get rolling. We're going to start by detailing the final frame and then giving it one more coat of Airbrush Primer. So let me show you all the tools we're going to use for this process. First, I've got plastic backed sandpaper of 150 and 220 grit, and then pretty much everything else is actually diamond sanding sticks. These ones are pretty coarse, but these go all the way up to 1200. I normally only use the 400 and the 600 ones. Then I have my diamond files. These are the large coarse ones. And then I have some progressively finer files for little details. I've got my scraping tools. Then I have my diamond blocks going from 120 all the way to 400. Then I've got my hooks to pick out any stuck little bits, followed by my clay tools. These are used with Bondo spot putty. This stuff is amazing. Doesn't smell very good, so make sure you're in a large or ventilated area, but it finishes stuff glass smooth. And last, I have some finishing pads. I have some fine and ultra fine. These are all the painting tools we're going to need. These are for balancing the frame upside down and right side up. These are part of the Lawgiver download package. I have this masking here for the bullets, which is quite useful. And airbrush wise, I use two Iwata Eclipse brushes. I have the gravity fed 0.35 needle, and that's for fine painting. And then my hose. This is a siphon feed, and it has a 0.5 nozzle on it. And I can just basically connect each of my colors, or top coats in this case, to the bottom, hose it on, run a little cleaner through it, and change around. So since we're painting large amounts of things the same color, this is pretty much the best way to go. And then for holding the parts, we have all these little trays. This is one of my designs, a Props 3D design, which I guess it is. It goes on this little ball bearing roller, and then you can put all of your parts on there and then just keep swapping the top as much as you need. So therefore it prevents you from having to pick up parts or deal awkwardly with things. It's got a whole series of holes in it. This is for, I actually snap these off to the right size. I can use these for balancing things, you know, whatever, keeping things off the plate. These are from sushi rolling mats. You can buy them in long mats, I guess that's the right word for it, all tied together by string. I just chop the string, take these out, and you have for about $1.50 a huge bundle of supports. Oh, and a paintbrush. We just need to paint one little thing by hand. So paint-wise, these are, actually, let's go from the base up. I love this Vallejo surface primer. It fills small little gaps, but it doesn't take out details. So even if we use it for the serial number plate or the top sight, it'll smooth out just little micro imperfections, but it's not going to fill in our fine little details. So for the body, I use Tamiya flat black, again, loaded up into this bottle. This stuff is way too thick to airbrush with, so I cut it about 35 to 50% with acrylic thinner. I don't measure it that carefully, but yeah, it'll flow perfectly through an airbrush if you do that. Then for the sights and the top cowl and the barrel, I use this Carbon Black by Golden. This is one of my favorite paints. It is an amazingly shiny surface. For our top coats, I use All Clad Lacquer. This is my favorite top coat. You can actually just use a rattle can if you want. That really looks good, actually. I generally, for bigger things, just use a rattle can, but I want to finish these nice. So I have clear coat flat and then clear coat gloss. And those are also loaded up into little bottles. And then finally for the bullets, I have some bronze. That'll be for the bullets themselves. And then there's two little rings around the bullets. They're, I have no idea what they actually mean, but they're on the Canon Lawgiver as made by Michael VK, and it's a cool little detail. I've added it to the model, so I'm going to use a little bit of copper just to highlight those. And of course, airbrush cleaner. As we change paints, we're going to get a dirty airbrush, so it kind of explains itself. Let me get these out of the way. Let's get started detailing. Oh, I forgot my favorite one. This is carefully contained in a special bag that's not for the waste of my dog. But this stuff is to make the sides glow. It's available on Amazon. There's a lot of different brands. I don't particularly recommend this brand. It was just a big bottle. It was cheap. I bought it and it works amazing. So as you've seen in the first video, I only wet sand. But because this is detail sanding, I don't really have to do it over the sink. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get this cowl really good. The cowl, because it's on the top and because it's all flat, is the most obvious if you have any defects or flaws in it. So we're going to try to make it very close to perfect. So I'm going to wet it all up. And then I'm going to take this and just give her a sand. There we go. I'm going to give this a nice once over and dip it all in there. Just a little bit with this 120 grit. There. I'm going to clean that off. Then go to the 200 grit. Don't want to overdo this. It's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to grab my 220 sandpaper and gently, yeah, I see some raised edges still. Like, I don't know if you can see that in the light. There's some raised edges. We're going to fill that in a minute. See, as I'm doing this, you can see the primer's coming off, but it's showing the ridges. We're going to use that to find our low points, give them a bit of a fill, and then just keep going through this process until there are no low points. You don't have to be so careful about it for the other parts. But as I said, definitely this cowl needs to be smooth as silk. Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be. It's up to you. Geez, here I am saying how you can finish your lawgiver. I am making this lawgiver as smooth as silk. You can make it as smooth as you want. Okay, I think that is... Oh, I want to do those little gaps, actually. Let me go grab this one and then the round one. So I'm going to go in here a little more. As a note, you don't want to smooth the hole. Remember, we threaded that. It's going to be a bit of a disaster if you do. All right, I don't really need to sand the inside. Actually, I might give it a light sand, just in case there's any little defects in there. I mean, we sanded it earlier, but only roughly. So you notice there are still some low points here. That's what we'll be tackling with the filler in a little bit, and then coming back at it. So now we are going to do the top cowl. Go at it with the 120. A little bit more water on that. I might tackle this a bit with the 150 3M sandpaper. This is very aggressive stuff. See, the difference here between using sandpaper and using the block is the block sort of enforces flat. It goes across it, so any low points it won't dip into. If I do it all with sandpaper, I sort of risk getting uneven, because if there are some dips in here, it's going to grind out faster. So I'm using a combination of the blocks to level it out, and then the sandpaper to kind of dig it out a bit. And that should, you can see the very faint remnants of a bit of ringing from the printer. Looks like we're taking this one right back down to the bare plastic. That's fine with me. It's going to make it a much nicer surface. Yeah, you can see there's a bit of artifacting here from the 3D printer. We are going to use filler for that. See, this is another huge advantage of using a primer that's not the same color as the plastic underneath. Low points are really well highlighted, so I know exactly where I want to hit it. And then when it's level, you can see it's level. So I'm going to need to hit it with a bit of filler in there, and maybe a titch up here, and that looks like about it. This is pretty good. I want to make sure on the flat file I'm staying just in the middle area. If I go up here, I'm going to muck up my corners. So I'm going to try to be very careful about that. This is rounded, so we're going to use our 150. Let's dig that down. And then for this, I can grab the medium. Where's medium? There we go. And the fine from here, just to keep that nice and flat. I'm going to use this to get into the corners. I'm going to grab the coarse and just try to smooth that bottom out a bit more. Just cuts out the layer lines. And then for in between here, let's see. So, a little there. Not going to do a lot on this. If I do, I'll end up cutting little grooves in here. Again, I've been careful to use the primer as marking fluid. I'm trying to find those low spots. All right, now I'm going to do the heels. I'm going to do the heel for the action only and for the electronic version. You may notice I give this a bit of a rock before I start sanding. I'm trying to find the middle. Otherwise, I'll end up sanding it at a weird angle. Just give it a rock, and then you can just find the middle. Now, let's do the barrel. You obviously want the barrel to be really nice and smooth, too. Just going to check the fit on that, actually. Oh, that's very nice. Want it to stay in place. There, but not be too tight. That is absolutely perfect. We haven't gotten there yet. So these guys, they don't really need any touch-up. I'm going to give them a bit of black paint just for fun, but I mean, I'm just going to make sure that it's all kind of smoothish. Probably won't even do the airbrush primer on this. Just take it right to final paint. That doesn't need, let's see, that doesn't need to be touched ones over there. And the magazine. All sorts of nooks and crannies. We'll add it with the medium. Filling is our next step after we're done this, since this will neatly show us all of the spots that need filling. And now for this little gap, I think it's this guy. Yeah. Scrape this in that reverse scraping method. Try to smooth it out. Same here. Now the bullets, they don't need a lot. I just have to be careful about flattening them out. So I'm just going to go into the grooves and then just give them a nice rub. What I mean by flattening them out is if I sand across here, I'm just going to wear grooves into them. He says sanding flat across. So I'm going to, get in there. These don't need a lot more than they've already had. There, I think that's more than enough for these. And what am I left with? The suppressor. See, there's an issue here. Let me see if I can hold it up. When I sanded it with the lathe, it worked great for the body, but I think it got too hot and sort of put some grooves into that. I sort of regret lathe sanding it now, to be honest. I'm going to see if I can maybe use one of these to smooth it a bit. But I suspect it'll just be a case of elbow grease to correct that. You think something's a clever idea, and then you do it. Now, you probably can't see this well, but I'm dragging the edge around, trying to chip out all the unevenness from the lathe. It seems to be doing a fairly good job. Sorry I can't show you better, but I got to really grind in there. Maybe if I turn it, you can see. Oh yeah. See, it's just getting in there and pulling out everything that's not flat. Actually, let's see how well that fits in. Hopefully that'll go in nicely too. Oh, it's a little stiff. I think the little front part here is a bit high. Just gonna sand that down. Maybe sand in a bit. Actually, scraper is probably a better tool for that. There, let's give that a try. Oh yeah, that was it. Much better. In which case, I'm going to scrape in here too. There, get all that out. That is very smooth. Like it. On sanding the next piece. The trigger's really nice. I don't think I'm going to need much beyond a little polish. All right, we are left with the last part. Oh, I want to kind of see how smooth this is. Now that's really smooth. I don't need to do anything there. Oh yeah, for the sake of completion, that's fine. Okay. Just polish it a bit. That's perfect. I don't need to do anything more on that. Last part, but definitely not least. Okay, push all this stuff out of the way. This is the biggie. I'm going to go across and scrape all of these surfaces to smooth them out. Because it was printed upside down, this area is kind of raggedy. Now, I could sand it, but it'll take forever. But the scraping does an amazing job of just evening it out in just like one step. So I don't need to sand this one too much. The plate goes up against it. Okay, and now for the hunt for the uneven surface. I'm just going to wet it a bit and then to start sanding. This one's pretty good. I mean, I don't think it needs a lot comparatively, which is weird because it's by far the most complicated one. But by far the most effort went into sanding it perfect right from the get-go. So I'm suspecting this may only be a short thing. I don't need to do much here. You see there's a little bit of unevenness. but this is actually hidden. For completionist sake, I'm going to give it a nice polish, but I don't need to get everything out of that. I do, however, need to get everything out of here, but I think this one's really good. Yeah, so that's nice and smooth already. So I don't need to do anything there. Actually, really happy with the grip. There's really not much I need to do to this. Okay, but I am going to give it a full 220 rub, because that will show me anything my eyes here will miss and smooth it out nicely for the Airbrush Primer. This is a large flat surface, so I am going to need to sand this until it is smooth straight across. Now I also want to check the fit on the magazine. That is perfect. Can rock a tiny bit. That means when we get all our top coats on, that'll drop in perfectly. Don't have to do anything there. And this is already very nice, so I'm just going to give it a polish. Okay, I'm going to grab the widest scraper I have, and I can definitely see a little edge in there. So I'm going to try to just very gently get it out. It's very risky using this, but it does a great job. Very gently. There, you can probably see that now. That part is getting cleaned up, but it's not touching the other part. That is because there's a ridge. I'm very careful because I cleaned this out nicely before. I do not want to take any detail off the eagle here, lest the Hall of Justice object. Oh, I'm going along the edge here. You can go along it with your nail. You do not want to sand the grip and the grip plate until they're both flush with each other. It'll look silly. Alrighty, what else? There's one more part. Yes, this. It's fairly smooth, but I want to get this a little smoother. If you don't see this, smoothing this out even just a bit will really help the reload action. That has to get glued to that, and if I glue it onto the primer, it's going to be glue on primer, which isn't that strong. So I don't have to do much here. I'm just going to dig this down to the base. Before we put any more paint on this, we will be gluing the plate on. So I can just get all of this off. All right, that is about 90% dry, so I'm going to put it in the other room under the fan with the other parts, and then I'm going to clean all this up and get ready for filling. So here we are. All the parts are dry and ready for filling, and let's see. Let's start with the frame. This is where the clay tools come in. So what we're going to look for is black spots, like here, where clearly there's either, in this case, the perimeters of the print, there's small little spots, or maybe there's some dings, though I don't see any dings. Yeah, or, little ridges. I think this one's too low to worry about, but there may be bigger ones somewhere. And we're just going to add little bits of this Bondo spot putty in there. It stinks, but it works amazingly well. I'm just going to get a little titch on the end and look for spots. There's a little bit there, a little bit there. The stuff sands really well, so don't worry if it sticks up. We're just trying to get those holes filled in as well as we can. It's a bit of a hunt and seek here. I think this is looking really good. So I'm going to grab my little trimming knife in case I see anything as we go. I want to sharpen some of these edges up. Start flattening these out. Make sure I push it all the way down into the hole. You don't have to be absolutely perfect on this pass. After we do the primer over top of this, the airbrush primer, it'll become really apparent where there's any defects. Like there's some scratches still in here from that 120 block where it's a little too aggressive. But it may just smooth out because of the last sanding we did. Only one way to find out. In here, since this was printed upside down, there's quite a bit of defects there. So I could have just sanded it down to infinity, but we're just going to build it up with the putty. And now I'm going to use the other end. This is my favorite putty tool. This little tiny one I can smush in small places. And this spreader is awesome. So I center this on the camera. We're getting into parts here. I'm just going to spread that on like jam on toast. I do not care if it sticks up, only that it is smushed into all the little gaps. So I don't think I need to do much more with this, at least on the, oh, there we go, looking on the bottom. I didn't flip it over. There's a nice little divot. And I think this tool is much harder on that end. But if you leave this for more than a minute, I would suggest wiping it off. It dries really fast, and if you try to spread it on while it's drying, it gets crumbly. And then after you've got your top coat on and you're all done and you're happy with it, you'll notice it'll actually crumble over time and come out. As long as it goes on wet, it sticks amazingly well. But if it goes on half dry, you are in for some no fun. That is taking one of the nitrile gloves I use for resin printing, cutting a finger off, and there is your organic filler spreader. Just do that. Smush it in there. Now the magazine. There are these little ridges here. Let's see if I can still feel them. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm just going to take a little blob on the end of my finger here. Why not show a few different ways of doing things? And I can just push that in, back and forth. Bye layer lines. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, hey, why did you even need to sand it? Why didn't you just use spot putty in the entire thing? Well, you can do that and let me know how it goes, because that would require an exorbitant amount of spot putty. And there's a lot of smoothing and shaping that goes into the sanding that I think blobbing spot putty all over would kind of miss. But, you know, seriously, actually, if you do it all in spot putty, I have been known to be wrong on many, many occasions. If you do it all in spot putty and it works amazing, please let me know in the comments. I would love to save myself the repetitive stress injury that comes with sanding these things to absolute death to get them smooth. You know, in fact, if you know any other methods to do any of this stuff, just let me know. You know, I'm always learning. Like you, a lot of or maybe not like you, I shouldn't speak for you, but I learned a lot of different techniques and methods by watching YouTube videos. It's one of the things, well, probably the single biggest thing that inspired me to get off my duff and grab a camera and do this. You know, share and share alike. We're all in this wild, wacky world together. You might as well learn from each other and have some fun, eh? Do it in here. It's weirdly just going to smear it towards the edge. Use my nail to get it right in there. And then I'm going to take this flat tool and then just go along it, trim off the excess. There. I think this part needed more filling than the rest of it put together. While I'm on that, I know this one needs a bunch of filler, especially this little bottom part. I'm going to give it the same treatment, full coverage. If we're going to be perfectly honest, I normally do this in either my airbrush booth or outside, because I am quickly realizing my mistake trying to do this at this table on camera, as I'm sort of racing between getting this done and getting overwhelmed by these absolutely disgusting fumes. I'm almost done, so I'm just gonna power through it. So, whoops, I've given this about 30 minutes to dry. I'd suggest giving it a bit longer, but it's usually fine after 30 minutes. All we're going to need is a bit of 220 sandpaper and our tools from before. And I'm going to sand all of this off. I really am looking to get pretty much all of this off. All we're using this for is to fill our low points, not as a coverage like we would a paint or something like that. See that some is stayed on like that? That's our low point. So we're going to try to not sand that anymore. And the Airbrush Primer will tell us if there's still any defects in this, and if not, then it's done. Well, done as in ready for final paint, I should say. Now, just going to scrape a whole bunch of this off of the back of the blade. Try to dig down there. No sense in sanding all that. One of the nice things is this Bondo sands much faster than the plastic, so you can go over it very lightly, remove the Bondo, not touch the plastic. Oh, there's a little bit that got inside. Going to just scrape it out. Actually, there's a tiny bit of material left there. Don't want anything to ride up against the OLED screen. There. Because there's some bigger dips in here, and if I use the sandpaper, it may go into the dips and then leave us with some low spots. So another huge advantage of these blocks is they just glide over the low spots. It wasn't such a big deal with the front, but this is such a bigger piece, this back cowl here, that I want to make sure we start off right, level it out, and then go in with the sandpaper. I'm using the back of the blade to clean out all the gunk in this screw hole because I don't want to strip those threads. I keep stressing that, but it's important. If you end up stripping the threads, it's very hard, if not impossible, to add them back. I mean, you can add some epoxy, drill the hole out again, and then re-tap that, but it's never quite the same as having those original threads. Oh, there's a little bit on the top. I meant to add that, but I forgot. So, just going to take the very tip, just add a little bit here and a little bit here. I'm not actually entirely sure these are... Oh, I am actually. Sorry, I was going to say I wasn't sure, but I actually stuck my fingernail and felt the ridges on it, so they're definitely low points. And we are done the next step. So what I'm going to do now is clean all this off, give this a few minutes to dry, and then we're going to come back and attach the resin middle sight and the resin serial number plate to it. So let me magically clean the desk yet again, and I'll see you now. All right, so before we can do the first of our airbrush primer coats, we have one final step to do, and that is to add the mid sight and the serial number plate onto the Lawgiver, and we are going to do that with super glue. I forgot one thing, a little vortex paint mixer. This is one of the many things I bought after watching a YouTube video, and unlike most of the things I've got from YouTube videos, this has proven to be solid gold. Not only for mixing paint, but also for mixing up my glues, because this stuff settles. And that gives me a nice, consistent glue. Before that, I was getting a couple of drops of basically water if I let it sit more than a few days, which was really disgusting. So I'm going to spread this out. Now I'm going to wander this around. I'm going to spread this really good. And I just realized I forgot my stupid clamps in the other room. So I'm going to put this on as fast as I can, then run into the other room and grab the clamps. You can just stick this on. You don't need the clamps. But it's another one of those little teeny tools that has been immensely useful to me. Make sure that the grip is solid on these kind of things. So I'm going to leave that and I'm going to run BRB. There. Ow! My little rack of modeling clamps. I can't tell you what brand they are. I got them from somewhere a long time ago. But if you had me list my favorite things, these little clamps would be amongst them. They are fabulous for just applying light pressure to something. They're not spring-loaded. I hate spring-loaded clamps because then you can't choose the pressure. So this allows me to go in there and just gently press the glue down. Okay, set that aside. And then I'm going to make sure this is really flush. It seems pretty good. I've done other ones for the RPF run and they haven't fit at all. And I've had to take the knife and kind of carve it out. I was sort of expecting to have to do that a little bit here, but it seems to be fitting absolutely perfect. Yeah, it doesn't raise at all. Kind of curious if I can get the clamps in on this one. Otherwise, I'll just hold it by hand for a bit. But thin layer, so it doesn't squirt out everywhere. Yeah. That's why I like keeping it a holder like this. So the glue doesn't go to the other side. The stuff's pretty thick. Just going to do a little bit around the outside. Sure it's facing the right way. Just finger tightening these. And now one big point of note, it's not so important here, but when you use super glue, the fumes are insane. So if this was painted, like it had its final paint and we super glued it, actually I've got a good example. This guy. But can you see that white there? Super glue is strong enough to actually bleach out the paint, just the fumes. So whenever I use super glue, I've made it a habit of putting a fan on it. Ever since I've started doing that, I've had no problems with the fumes damaging anything. So I just put a very gentle fan on it, and then I'm going to be back in 5 minutes. All right, I've given that more than enough time to dry. Let's give all of this one final inspection and then move over to Airbrush Primer. We're just about there. So final thing before we do our painting is just an inspection, and then I'm going to blow each part off just to make sure there's no dust on it. So let's get this set up. So we're going to give this 2 passes. The first pass is like this. It locks in upside down. Now, when we do the second pass, we'll be taking it off here. putting it on here, and then using this for the top cowl. The first pass on the top cowl, we're going to do it upside down, just like this. And actually, I'm going to grab a little bit of wood. There, just going to grab some scraps from my scrap bin. And then, is that blocking your view? I don't think it is. So let's get that aside. And I'm going to boost it up, keeping the sight in the middle. So the first time is this way up. Second time, I'm going to put it on this stand, just like that. Oh, which means I made a mistake here. That gets saved. And yeah. I'm going to put that on a tray. Oh, remember the heel plate we used before to do it? We'll be doing that for the second pass. I don't want to run off and grab it. So first time this side up, second time we'll use the heel plate for the other side. And I'll be putting that with these, setting it aside. Do the magazine as its own thing. For this one, as soon as I spray it, it's going to tip. So I'm going to snap this here and put it in. Actually, which one had the smaller holes? Put it a little off center, and that's going to keep it from falling over. I'm going to do these two on their own. I can take this and put it here, and then I'll show you what I do after. But essentially, this one is now this one, and then when we switch it, we're going to reuse them as well. Reduce, reuse, recycle. You know how it goes. And for this guy, I'm actually going to boost it up a bit. I'm not going to paint the underside. I mean, why bother? And to be honest, the 3D print's kind of cool. The infill pattern, I mean, that's cool. I like that. So I'm going to leave it like that. And then I'm going to paint it just like this. So, got it all set up. Let's go over to the airbrush station, starting with the big one. Now this primer is a bit thick, so it's a little sputtery, but to be honest, it works perfectly, so I don't really care. I gotta stop every minute because the pressure on this is higher than my compressor can take. So if I stop every minute or so, it'll let the compressor catch up. Otherwise, I'll slowly lose pressure. Now it's starting to even out. Now I'm going to put in the other stand and flip it over. I can do the other side without getting my hands dirty or smearing my paint. And I'm going to try to get in on the angles here, fill that area in. Alright, do the magazine. Give this one a nice thick coat. Whoa! Woo! Brace this one up so I can get underneath it on the side. Another advantage of a siphon feed. If this was the gravity feed, I probably would be refilling this like 3 times. I'll do that by hand later. Oh! Alright, I'm going to turn this way down again. There, stay. We will be doing down inside this barrel. Just give me a sec. I'll be doing that as its own thing when we do the other side. I'll just be putting a stick on it and then spraying straight through it. I don't really want to deal with that in the first pass. Using this to spray off any dust I see here. Don't want to encapsulate that in paint. I know it seemed maybe a bit odd that I took it from smooth back to sputtery, but to be honest, this stuff's pretty thick for an airbrush, and once it's smooth, it's basically gunning on. So I'd rather have it a little sputtery like this. As you can see, it's going on super easy, than have it dripping off, which is what will happen if I have it set too high. But if it drips, I gotta resand and repaint. Alright, it's looking good. I think that is our first pass. Alright, here we are back again. I've given it about 30 minutes for the one side to dry, and now we're going to do the other side. Remember, this is only the parts we need to paint the other side of. So we don't have to do the frame again or anything like that. In fact, it would be bad if we did it because it would get all gummy. Bit of dust on here, I'll just clean it out later when this is dry. Never pick off dust from wet paint. That is a very important lesson. I put the heels back in the little paint stands and I've taped those down. And we're going to do our resin sight. Be a little slow and careful with this. We don't want to build it up too thick, but we want to get inside the sight. See, on Canon, this is a laser sight. And the last piece we have to do is this barrel, or sorry, the suppressor barrel. And so I put it on this little stand with the dowel down it, so that way I can spray right down the barrel and get it all painted properly. Actually, I'm going to start by doing this. This is really gross. Don't want to do too much of that. We'll go at the end. Already very nicely coated. I'm just going to gently go around the inside. Then I'm going to dab off this excess here. Alright, so I can just set all this aside to dry for about an hour or two. That way we can come back, check and make sure it's all perfect, and start any finishing details before final paint. And we are back. The next day, in fact. I am used to using a Canadian primer called 1K High Build Primer. Stuff is absolutely amazing, and it dries in about an hour, hour and a half, ready to sand tops. This Vallejo Airbrush Primer, however, remained tacky throughout yesterday. Seems to be pretty good today, but I had to give it overnight before we can move on to this next step. And this next step involves subjectivity. If I was doing this for myself, this looks pretty excellent. After I've got a little weathering on here and a little use, probably hardly tell this from metal. But I'm not doing it for myself. I am doing this as part of the RPF run. And part of my RPF run is doing everything amazingly well. So I'm going to put it to you where you want to stop, but I'm going to be inspecting these parts. And if they pass, they're going to go over there in my ready for final paint pile. If they are not, I have a tray, I got water. We are going to sand and repeat until these things pass muster. So looking at the frame, here I'm going to keep each of these parts in here so you can see. I'm taking off my glasses. You know it's serious when the glasses are taken off. So I can see some scratches there. Otherwise it's looking pretty good. I think I sprayed it a bit thick. There's a couple little bubblings there. Honestly, it's pretty good, but we're going to give this one another go. Oh, well, I guess I got to put my glasses on because I'm looking at my monitor there to see what you can see. We didn't do the stand. The stand looks really good, and we're going to use a rattle can to give this a nice thick coat. I didn't mention that before, which is why I brought it in. To be honest, it looks great. I think just the rattle can is going to do her. So I'm going to put that aside. You won't see it again till the end. Well, until we rattle can it. So looking at the base. Again, a little rough. We're going to fix this one up. I think this one looks great. Plus, it's not actually part of the electronics build, so I'm not going to waste my time. Bullets look great. Here, I need to make 2 piles. So it looks great. Looks great. little crud here, but this honestly doesn't matter because this goes inside. All we really care about is this bottom part, which looks great. Moving down the list. Ooh, this looks very nice. I am going to give this a bit of a rub though, just to make it really nice because it's the back, but this is, I mean, this is the thing. I don't even have to really prime this at this point. I am, because I'm overdoing it, but the top coat itself will smooth it out a little bit. This one's also looking super sharp, but I'm going to do, so I'm just going to rub these with a fine one. I'm going to make like a sub pile here. Yeah, that's got a little bit of crud. That's going to need some rubbing down. We've already been through that one. You may have actually noticed I didn't do the top, the second pass. Whoops. I'm just going to inspect it as is, and I can see there's a tiny, tiny fraction of layer lines in there. That wouldn't have come out with another spray, so I'm going to resand this one for sure. And same thing with this one. I didn't do the other side yet, but I can see there's some scratches down there, so we're going to redo this. And then, oh yeah, this one's, oh sorry, couldn't see that. This one's the worst. It's been giving me lots of trouble. So it looks like this was a very successful priming pass. So now I'm going to pile these up and start to work through them. Looking at the suppressor, it looks very nice, but I can see some little bits on it. I think I can get that out with the coarse of our scrubbing pad here. So I'm going to get the coarse scrubbing pad, the fine scrubbing pad, and move these parts off to the side. I'm going to start by wetting the whole thing. This one's going to get the coarse pad. Now you don't want to push too hard. It will work faster if you do that, but these can actually, this stuff can actually dig some pretty big grooves into your parts. So we're going to go gentle with it. So a note on here, you are not trying to remove this primer like we did with the sandpaper. We already know it's good at this point. What we're trying to do is smooth out the primer. And this is also why I had to wait the day, because if the primer is still tacky at all, this step will actually smush it around quite a bit, as well as running deep grooves in it. And we will end in an infinite loop of sanding and priming to remove the scratches from the sanding. We don't want that. So now I've done this one. I'm going to go over with the fine, just briefly. Really trying to smooth this. That's why I'm not using sandpaper. I love this stuff for finishing paint a lot more than I do sandpaper. For one, actually, if I may continue along with the little tips and tricks, is sandpaper over primer tends to fill in very quickly. These, I can soak them in hot water and it pretty much gets all the primer out. But I find sandpaper becomes a write-off pretty quick when you do this. So that's all she needs. This is nowhere near as big as that step from before when we spent, well, you didn't spend, but I spent, hopefully it was sped up, 3 hours sanding off all of our nice primer. So again, this one is on the really good pile. So I'm just trying to knock off any little tiny bits and smooth it out with the very fine finishing pad. Nothing more. And I'm not doing any of the parts. Actually, you know what? I will just in case. I was going to say I wasn't going to do any of these parts, but I do want to because this is where the reload reciprocates. We don't want that to be coarse. So the trick here is if I sand it down and I get through the primer and I still see black lines, then I need to keep going until they start to disappear, which won't be a lot. Yeah, this is actually a really good example. So you see here I've gotten through the primer we put on and you can still see these black lines. They are so shallow now but they will totally ruin the reflections off the cowl. So at this point, I'm not going to bother with the blocks or anything like that. It is really close. I am going to go until these lines are almost faded out. And that's going to give me a super smooth finish. You may ask why I don't print these in resin. This is why. High impact PLA. If you do this with resin, you end up with lots of resin pieces. This stuff, this high impact PLA is strong enough I can take a hammer to it. I'd probably print a hammer out of it, come to think of it. The problem is too, sometimes I've even got this perfectly flat, come back to it on some of the other ones, and it hasn't been perfectly flat after. There is some settlage here for sure. Oh, dude, I can totally see the stepping here. Ah, look at this. Oh, it's peeling. It's peeling. Oh, that's what happens when primer is not fully cured. In some ways, I am glad I got to show you that. In other ways, obviously, I am not, because now I'm going to have to take this whole thing down on this side, which is fine. You can always add paint back. So I had to, oh wow, it's still peeled. This stuff sucks. I mean, it doesn't suck per se, maybe if it got a little more time, but I've never seen, look at this. I'm just peeling all the paint out. Wow. Oh my gosh. I stripped this site off camera, but I thought it was good enough. Okay, so proving the parts, we're going to paint this again, but when I paint it this time, I'm going to try to thin this paint with a little acrylic thinner, this primer, that is, and hopefully it won't make this much of a mess. That one's good. I mean, I have to say, it's a pretty nice finish. It's just that peeling issue. That's kind of a non-starter. So I'm going to do the same thing where I'll start one way up, then flip her on the stand and do the other side. So let me show you how to quickly thin the primer out, and then let's throw another coat of paint on this. So this is, I'm going to try to cut it about a third. And we have about a third of a bottle left. So I'm going to mix this stuff up. I'm going to add about a third more of this. It's about 2/3 full. Then I'm going to get my acrylic thinner, my Cameo acrylic thinner. And there's, oh yeah, that's very thick. I don't know why it says just stick in airbrush. What kind of airbrush would just take this stuff straight up? It's really thick. There, and then making sure the air vent is covered. Otherwise, we'll end up with tiny little droplets of paint everywhere. I'm just going to mix that up. So I've left about 10% in here. If this isn't thinned enough, I'm going to add that other 10%. And if it still needs some more thinning, I'm going to pour some out into another bottle and then keep thinning it until it sprays nice and even. And that should solve our problem. So let's take these over and start painting. Definitely thinning the paint made a world of difference. Here we are again, 24 hours later. The directions say, allow 12 hours to cure before masking. Usually I give my primers about 2 to 3 hours before sanding, but this stuff is something special. Reading online, it says it needs 24 hours to cure before painting over, and 24 hours later, this stuff still stinks pretty bad. So it's making me a bit nauseous. It is working well. I mean, look at that. But boy, do I miss my 1K primer. So I'm going to give it an inspection. Any part that's approved is going in that bin. When they're all done, we'll move on to top coat. At this point though, if there's any tiny imperfections, I'm going to try to take it out with the sandpaper. And if I don't need to take it down, I should be able to do my top coat straight over top. All right, bring all these back, finish all these up. Hopefully we will need no more primer, and this will be good enough. So I'm just going to give this a light rub. No sanding. Well, I mean, this is sanding within itself, but no sandpaper sanding. And I think we'll actually be able to final coat it in about half an hour. Just going to give it a rub, blow it off with the fan, see if it's even. And that should be all she wrote. Little point of note too, you see me rubbing this down pretty hard with a paper towel. Paper towel actually sands primer if it's a little tacky like this too. Once you scuff it up with sandpaper and then take those scuffs down to a fine fuzz with the finishing pad, you can then use the paper towel to just rub that off and level it out. So I'm going to add a thin layer of filler and sand it off. And my suspicion is this filler, as soon as I sand it, this filler is just going to go away. But it's worth a shot. See if it does anything. But I do have to level this out. There. Well, those are drying for about half an hour. I am going to stop filming. And when we come back, we're going to give the filler a little sand and start final painting. Alrighty, giving this about 30 minutes. Let's sand the filler. Perfect. Just move on to the next ones. Got the little filler on here. Should also be the right one. Don't want to overdo this. Dry this off so it's nice and damp. Give it one more little rub. So painting wise this time, we're not going to be using the same paints. For the top and the suppressor, I'm going to be using, and we're going to do the resin sites this time. We're going to be using the golden carbon black. And then for the rest of it, we're going to be using Tamiya flat black that has been cut about 40% with airbrush, which has been cut 40% or so with airbrush thinner. So, which has been cut 40% or so with acrylic airbrush thinner. So it'll spray a lot smoother. And we're going to be using the other airbrush this time. And this is the gravity feed because we're not going to be using as much paint. That's for this stuff, I should say. So let's go. We have our thin first coat of final paint. I will no longer be touching these with my bare hands, but using nitrile gloves. Didn't really care much about the primer, but I do have to say, and I probably didn't mention, I always wash my hands thoroughly because the grease on your hands can leave artifacts on the paint. Like it may bond to your grease on your fingerprints better or be repelled by it. Water is repelled by oil and leave fingerprints on your model. So on the primer, that's not such a big deal because it's thicker coats, but these are very thin coats and this is our final paint. So I want to make sure that I am not going to leave my DNA on this. And we will be doing the bullets this time. So I did have a change of heart, by the way. I did all the other ones in the rich bronze, which I have extra of, but I was by the model store yesterday and they had this really nice bright brass. So I'm going to try it. And I have one done. Actually, I'll just show you. I hope you don't think this is my first lawgiver ever. Obviously not, I've said so. But this is how it looks in the bronze, and I think that is very pretty. But for contrast, I just want to see how it looks in the brass. So before I paint this, I'm going to add the mask. And that's what this is used for. And gently slide this down. Then push it down till it clips. And this is going to allow us to keep the back plate black. Otherwise, when you look at an angle in the magazine, you're going to see a bronze just slab in there, and it's going to look dumb. So we're masking these off. We could mask this with tape, yes, but I'm lazy. I just made a template. So let's just go through these. Beautiful. There's a tiniest little mark there. That's just from my fingerprint. It's very tippy. I knocked it over, caught it with my hand, and went shiza. So this one's looking gorgeous. So that, however, looks money. It didn't start sputtering until I did the little tiny sites, of course. But this one looks great, and I love it. Totally good. Same with this guy. That looks great. The suppressor looks like I may have put a tiny bit too much. I don't know. I kind of like the pattern on that, though. I think the issue is it just needs a second coat. So, love it. And I think that is, aside from little bits like this, which are already, you know, great. That's it. That's our inspection. So, let's go over to the airbrush and throw on the next coat. So here we are back at our inspection table one final time. So I did take a look at it before. I love how it's looking, but I'm going to give it a close look with you. And we're going to make sure this is 100% perfect because it is top coat time. This is the last step before we assemble this. So I have a all-clad clear coat flat. This has an additive in here to prevent any shine. And then I have the clear coat gloss. The gloss will be used for the tops, the sights, the barrel, which is in here, one sec, and the flat will be used for all the other parts. And yes, the barrel is in here. You may have noticed that. I didn't. This is Adam Savage's. It's part of the RPF run, and that run gets these amazing metal barrels made by Beaks Builds, linked to his channel in the description. So I didn't really think I needed to do a barrel for his, but I need to show you how to do a barrel. So I'll cut that footage in after somewhere. Maybe I'll make it look like it was done at the same time. But just know it's not in the shot because, whoops. So with that initial coat of heavy rattle can primer, followed by 2 coats of airbrush primer, followed by 2 coats of final paint, and finally followed by 3 coats of top coat. If I don't give each coat time to breathe, essentially the inner coats are going to be sealed inside and they're going to be mushy for a long time. Like I've seen coats that have been sealed in that are mushy for a month. What does that matter? Well, when we put it together, those mushy ones are going to allow the outer coats to chip right off and we'll be right back to square one. So we're going to give it time. But I'm not coming back here to inspect. We're going to look at it now. We're going to go over there and I'm just going to cut the 3 quick takes of each of the top coats and we're going to come back here for final assembly to get this done. I'm excited. This has been quite the process.
Hello all, we're back about a week later. Between here and there, I've had a cold and given the parts plenty of time to cure. we're going to be finishing off the painting by doing the judge's shield on the stand. By the way, you didn't see me do the stand. It was just done with a rattle can. This is where we left it primed, and I just shook a rattle can and went psh, psh. So hopefully you can fill in the gaps there. And we're left with this, and it's had enough time to set very well, which we need to before doing this next step. Then we are going to do the glow on the sights, so they'll actually glow in the dark. And then we'll be doing the details on the bullet. That is the part on the back here and on the front here. And we'll start with the logo. We'll be using carbon black, which is an airbrush paint. We want a very thin paint for this. And I'm just going to grab another paper towel. And what we're going to do here is dirty, but we're going to weather this after, and it'll look great. So I'm going to shake this up, and then I'm going to put it on the brush, saturate that quite a bit. So it's just sitting on there. And then I'm going to very quickly, well, I'll move that out of the way, very quickly go in and splatter it in all the details. Now I got to be quick here, and I don't care if I smush it around, it doesn't matter. You'll see why in a minute. And then, but I am going to try to be thorough, get the details, try to make sure the paint doesn't pool anywhere. There we go. And then, whoops, still at the bottom, take the paper towel and very quickly wipe it up. Great thing about airbrush paint is it takes longer to set than most craft acrylics. And you can just rub it out. And this again is why the paint needs to be very cured. If this paint is fresh, it will ruin it, because it'll smear it off too. And that's our first pass. Now I can go in, touch up those little points, darken it a little more. I don't need to add more paint. There's still plenty in there and plenty on the brush. Okay, and now I'm going to actually fold this so it's nice and flat. And that way, I'm not going to be going inside. I just want to go over the top. And that's it. Judge's shield is good. So I'm going to do this on the other side. That looks good to me. Just that easy. We've got our judge's shield. Now, just going to leave that damp. This won't take long. For the glow on the sights, I'm going to take some skewers just to hold this still. And hold them face up. And my paintbrush for this is going to be a Q-tip. Just going to get my glow-in-the-dark paint. This is nothing special. This is just UV reactive paint I bought off of Amazon. I can't really recommend it more or less than other paint. I do keep it in this handy-dandy dog poo bag though, because I don't want it getting exposed to light all the time. I don't actually know if that affects it, but just in case. So hold on. Be very delicate with this and just dab it in there. Hopefully you can see, yep. I'm gonna try to just keep dabbing it in there until the sight is completely full to the brim. So when it dries, it'll create a hole in the middle again that I'm gonna fill. So it'll actually take probably 3 or 4 coats all in to get this done. And I'm just going to build it up in layers. You can leave it at 1 coat, but to be honest, it won't glow for very long. The trick to getting this to glow really well is to add a lot of material. And we're just going to do it by filling it up, letting it dry, filling it up, letting it dry, and repeating until this sight is completely full. So that is full right to the top. This one needs just a titch more. And there we go. So that's it for that step. There, I'm going to move on to the last step, which is I'm going to remove this. And that's why we needed that mask as well, because check it out. It's all nice and black on the inside. And I'm using some copper paint. I'm just going to get it on the end. Just need a little bit. Then I'm just going to carefully paint it in. Now the first coat is going to be very transparent. I am not going to try and put it on thick because it'll just make it blobby. Just going for coverage. That's enough right there. Only dabbing a little bit on because you're trying to follow the lines on the bottom and the lines on the top. And putting too much on will not allow you to follow any lines. You just end up blobbing it. All right. And that is about enough of that. So I'm going to put my fan on all this. And I'm going to come back in about 5 minutes and do the next coat. Well, this will probably need more than 5 minutes, but this will only need 5 tops. See that little hole in the middle? That means it's pretty close to dried. So I'm going to try to, well, I need this light too. I'm going to try to push that in a bit. Make sure you push it in pretty good. You don't want to create an air bubble in there. You see there's an air bubble in this one. Just going to pop it out. And you can see here, you know, after it dried, it's pretty well covered. So I think 2 coats would probably do it. I think this one's going to be good enough with this coat. We'll check it out in a few minutes. And I am sure that these are going to require at least 2 more coats before they are completely full. So let's take a look at these. This looks perfect to me. I'm going to call that done. And then there's still a little, let's see if we get that to focus. Oh, that's kind of confusing. Yeah, there's still a little bit of a divot there, but it looks like we're getting really close. There. And I guess we're just going to give that another 20 minutes or so and come back to it. We've got all our parts ready for final assembly with the non-3D printed parts on this side and the 3D printed parts on this side. Let's do a quick inventory, make sure everything's there, do the final solder joint on the switch, and then get this put together and ready to go. So we're going to go through, let's do the easy stuff first. We've got our battery, we've got our power, and for the power, I am going to get the switch, the heat shrink, the last 2 smaller heat shrinks for the switch contacts, and what else do we need? The heel 3D printed part. So we're going to deal with those first so we can continue along with the rest of the assembly. Then we've got our electronics caddy with all the parts installed, the 7-segment LED for our fire lighting effects, our OLED, our power junction box. Then we have the trigger and reload, and the 2 startup LEDs, our screws. This is the remainder of the screws we counted out when we started, so I'm just going to assume they're all there. The display for the static or action-only version. Then we've got our 2 cut rods for the reload mechanism, our small cut brass rod for the trigger, our spring for the magazine release, and then the coil spring for our reload. The 2 pieces of acrylic we cut earlier for the magazine windows. And finally, our lens to focus the lighting effects. And then I don't think I need to go through the 3D printed parts because we've been through them together. But the one thing I want to talk about is, remember when I changed the paints for the bullets? I want to show you these two side by side. So this one is done in bronze and this one is done in brass. And to be honest, I like, with copper rings, same copper rings on both of them. I like them both, but I am going to lean towards the bronze. I kind of like the darker look better. So we'll go with that, and I will put this aside for another lawgiver. So I'm going to set all of these parts aside for us to grab from. And then I'm going to put the parts for the power in, starting with the power switch. Hold that up there. It's simply make sure the on is facing forward. That's the straight line. And then I'm just going to gently work that in. I'm going to be gentle about it because I don't want to scratch the paint. And that's all the way through. And I don't need this anymore. And need these two. Let's head over to the soldering iron just for 2 seconds and get these attached. So this one goes to here. Just gonna tilt that down. That was the tip of the soldering iron. 400 degrees Celsius. That's all we need. Let's head back over. Now we just want to pull the heat shrink down, and then it's a little hard, but we have to kind of flatten it out. There should be just enough room to get it over the terminal. And now I'm going to slide the larger heat shrink from the top over this, and then set it in place. Get my little heat shrink gun to give it a minute to heat up. I'm going to take it from the side because I don't want to melt the PLA. Going nice and slow. There, perfect. It's nice and flat on this side. I'll take a little bit of double-sided tape. Stick it on. Then I am going to kind of hook it down underneath, right flat along the side, and then push it in place. And that's one power mechanism. And we're ready for the assembly. I'm going to grab some white gloves because I don't want to put fingerprints all over this. And put this aside for now. We're going to start with the magazine because it's kind of its own thing. Make sure this is nice and clean. And then get the magazine plates. Oh, I didn't double check the parts. It's over here. Got this retainer for the plates. And remember, this is in multiple sizes. This is, whoa, you have to be careful. This is 1.3 millimeter acrylic. And so I printed the 1.3 millimeter retainer. I'm going to take these out. Just make sure they are nice and clean. So we're going to start this. So this little ring is on the bottom. And we're going to start that like this. We're going to put the retainer over, and we're going to kind of hook it on the top. It'll try to fall. So we're going to hook it gently here. And we're going to put the two side plates on. Bit of dust. Oh, it's on the other side, not a biggie. Okay, now we're just going to give this a start.
So here's how I start it. I've got the two side plates a little lower. I've got the top kind of hooked around back on the top so it doesn't slide in underneath. And I'm just going to push it straight down until it's all in. Then I'm going to push the top plate. I'm just going to put it on there so I don't damage it. Then that should lock in, and it doesn't. It's a little obstinate at the end. And there we go. There's the completed, oh, get that to focus. There's the completed magazine. Should be perfectly flush on top. Now we're going to put in our mag catch. So I'll put that aside. Grab the frame. And then I get my small spring, my magazine catch. Oh, and again, I'm going to grab another part. I forgot an optional piece. Optionally, you can put a little piece of tape on the top, like I've put a little bit of duct tape here. This will just hold it in place, but it also makes it harder to remove. If you want it easy to remove, just don't put the tape on top. So I wanted to make sure that was an option for you. So I'm just going to move this out of the way. This one is nice and easy. I'm going to slide in the first the spring, sorry. Boop. And slide in the catch. You might have to work it in gently. Then rotate it 90 degrees. So it comes up through here. And at this point you could be done. This is actually on purpose because you can flip this in to lock the magazine in place, and it also makes it flush on the bottom. Or flip it back into place. I'm going to slide the catch with the tape in it. There. And now you can't lock it, so it'll keep it in place. Let's test the magazine fit, shall we? I'm always babying this the first time I do it. You can really just shove it in there, actually. So hold on, make sure that's in frame. Yeah, see? Perfect. Actually, bit stiff because of the fresh paint. There, perfect. And retention is perfect, so just gonna slide that out. Yeah, and there we go. Magazine's done. And we are going to start on the electronics part. Yeah, let's start with the reload and the trigger. These two are attached together. And now I got the plastic trigger. So this one being Adam Savage's for the RPF run, he actually gets a metal trigger made by Beeks from Beeks Builds. He did all of the amazing machining work in the run. So if you'd like to check out his YouTube channel, there's a link in the description below. In a little bit, we'll be milling our own metal barrels, but we'll be milling them from a newbie maker point of view rather than an actual machinist. He is actually doing his own videos on how to machine the barrels properly. So I would highly recommend you watch that if you're considering doing metal barrels of your own. Oh, this is an interesting issue. Yeah, I had this come up before in the run. Check this. So this is a tolerance issue. Not a knock on Beeks at all, or Paul, I should say. It just has to do with the minute tolerances in these things. I'm going to grab a 4mm drill bit. This hole is exactly 4, and this pin is exactly 4. So I'm going to need to actually remove the paint out of here and show you the funny little issue here. Actually move that more to the center of the camera. Move these out of frame. And that is If I slide this trigger on, you see how it sits forward and all the way back here. Maybe see it in the light a little more. You know what? I'm going to zoom this in. There. So if you can see on the plastic trigger, it sits perfectly and perfectly at the back. On the metal trigger, it is a very fraction wider at the back, and it doesn't go all the way to the back. So we are going to solve this with a very gentle nudge with a chisel. Just take out a tiny little piece of plastic. I had to do these on the others too. It's just very easy. So let's add the metal trigger again. And that did it. Perfect. So let me get all this out of the way. And, oops, this one doesn't have the nut on it. There. All right, I'm going to need to put this on. So you can use this to actually adjust the trigger to make it tighter. So what I want to do is keep rolling it to the back until it's pushed right against the trigger, but not pushed too much. So I'm going to adjust this so I have a nice travel on the trigger. If I do it too far, I'm going to lose some of that travel. If I do it too loose, the trigger is going to rattle around. So I want it nice and tight. I think that is good. And then just set this on. Oh, I think this needs to go a little further in. And then, I'm going to need to widen that a bit with the 4mm. All this paint we built up on it is causing a bit of a tolerance issue. There. And then I actually want to push that through a bit. I'm going to use one of the other bars and the hammer. This can't be sticking up at all. There. Oops. Now it's through the other side a bit. Did this a little bit exact. I tend to do things a little more exact than they have to be because I don't like rattling. And if you do them too loose, they tend to rattle around. So I'm going to grab the two 3mm by, I think they're 16s. And then, all right, let's give that a check. That's a very nice trigger movement with no slop. So I say that it's perfect. Let's move on to the back. So for the back, I'm going to start by putting the two pieces together and dropping in the metal rods. Oh, I can't remember, top or bottom? Yeah, it's the bottom. There. That should act as a reload guide. You technically don't need that. It'll work without it, but it makes the reload a lot smoother and a lot snappier. And then up to the front, I'm going to flick it over the top with this tool. See, I need something pointier to push it down into place with. Make sure that goes all the way down. There. There, that should now snap in and out. I'm going to take the switch. Oh, we should have done the switch first, actually, because it's going to push against us. It's okay. I'm just going to open it a little bit. Oh, pushed it through a little too much. There. There. Take the M3 by 16, put it in the bottom. And then the M3 by 20 will go on the top.
Just want to make sure this is all the way in first. So one point of note is if you had done the little pin, you can put it in now. We skipped that part because I'll be making a metal version of that because this is part of the RPF run. But if you did have that, you could just glue it in now. And it simulates the pin that actually held the slide from the prop onto the Glock they used inside so it could reciprocate together. So these two are now done. I'm going to slide them aside and we are going to start on the 3mm LEDs. I'm going to make sure we get a good shot of this because this isn't the easiest part. So for these two little LEDs, what we're going to have to do is, let me get a really close shot here. So I'm going to bend this right here. Come on, there. I'm going to bend that right there to 90 degrees. And then just make sure that is correct. To grab a bit of pair of tweezers and coax that into place. There we go. Just push that in. I'll give that a nice push. It's important to make sure these sit flush as possible to make sure that they don't hit the OLED screen. It looks like the top one doesn't want to go in all the way. Huh. I mean, you can do this with a regular knife, but I got this. I'm just going to expand the hole a little bit. Just going to make sure these are over. And then the last operation I'm going to do is fold these flat against the back. So right now they're sticking out and they're going to hit the caddy as it goes in. So I'm just going to fold them flat. And that's that. Just want, hold on, get it centered, to slide it in. And now one point of note is sometimes these are quite rough when you get them and they're not going to fit. Just gently sand them down until they fit properly. Let's give this one a try. You need it, either way up works. You just need the screw holes aligned. Just pull that through, push it in, and sits nice and flush. So we're going to grab our 6mm M3 screws and just screw, whoa, flipped around the top. Just screw those in. Oh, it's not perfectly lined up. If it's not perfectly lined up, I just like to take the tip of something pokey like this and then just coax it back into place. Just gotta wiggle it up and down a bit. I would hazard a guess to say we didn't even tap that. Oh, I may have forgotten to tap that. No biggie, can tap it in place. Just gonna stick this tap on the end. I thought I tapped everything. I guess I forgot these. Or maybe they just got too filled up with paint. Either way, not a biggie. Whoops. Okay. Next step off here is installing the OLED. And oh, not the OLED, sorry, it's the trigger group and trigger. I can't install the OLED first because there's this groove right here that the OLED wires go into. So these are nice and easy. Oh, actually, I'm being very ginger because I'm not wearing my other glove. Put that back on now. There, I'll slide that in. Then lift that over the top. There. There we go. Then gently slide this into place. So there. Slide that all the way forward. If this is sitting correctly, this should sit flush against the back, which it is, and that is our trigger group installed. Now, we're going to need actually something gentle to put this all on, because we're going to need to lie it down and install our power unit. So, we're going to feed this up through the middle. And then hopefully we can grab that. Coax it out. Actually, tweezers might be a better choice. There, pull that up through the top. And then we're going to put that into the bottom like so. What we're going to do here is pull all of that through. So all these wires are aligned in the middle. Then we're going to grab the little retainer and we're going to slide that with a gap in the middle between all 4 wires, and it should go nicely into place. May take a bit of coaxing because it's supposed to be tight. So you can see it went between them. So we're going to make sure we're not pinching any of these 4 wires, which we're not, and just slide that back into place and it should lock. And now we're going to grab our 2 long remaining M4 screws. Yep. I am going to use this flexi rod here. It's not necessary, but I don't really want to scratch the front up, which can happen if you're not careful. Woo! Perfect. Now, we just need to take the OLED screen very carefully, peel off the sticker or the screen protector. Let me grab my tweezers again and pull all these wires out through the top so they're not in the way. And we're going to slide this very gently into place. Just like everything here, there's barely enough room by design. Maybe not intelligent design, but come on. It should go fairly easily, but I just don't want to pressure anything here. There we go. So now I'm going to take my OLED retainer, and then I'm going to gently put it in the 2 tracks, and then coax the OLED around it. Now, don't force this, and be careful of those 2 little power LEDs. If the 2 power LEDs stick out too far, you won't be able to get the OLED in place. And if they are, you want to actually seat those better before you go about putting this OLED in, or you may cause problems. So I also want to check that the little wires also aren't in the track, which they aren't. But if it doesn't go, that's another issue. So now I'm going to gently coax that around, slide it into place. Oops. It actually may be hitting that little wire a bit. The front one. Just going to bend it back. Yep. And there we go. And that is all the electronics. So now we can give her a whirl before we put the top on. Pull all the plugs out. And we're going to get our power distribution box. Plug that in, red to red. And black to black. We're going to plug the LED on the top above the red. And then I'm going to stretch the rest out. And grab our electronics caddy. I'm going to start with the OLED and very carefully plug that in. Just gently rock it into place. If I can get that away, you can see it, but I'm just going to rock it back and forth. There we go. Then I'm going to make sure all the wires are organized, the trigger and reload 2-pin, plug that in. Then I'm just going to gently thread this one through. This is for the data pin from the 7-segment LED. Actually, I'll do that last because I think that's going to block your view. So I'm going to take the OLED, and that goes in the second place above the red. I'll be gentle, I'm not forcing any wires here. There we go. Then the audio player, and that can go the one above the black. And finally, our Arduino, which goes in the last available spot at the top of the black row. And now we can do this single pin. Just try to make sure I thread that through so it's not getting stuck on anything. Okay, and that is it all plugged in and ready to go. We're going to slide the heel off. Should be some room here. And we're going to plug it in, turn it on, see what happens, and turn her on. Hold the trigger down. Oh, we forgot to plug in the LEDs. She's working perfect, but forgot to plug in those 3 LEDs. So I'm just going to grab the cable for that. Actually, where is that? Way down here with my tweezers. And then I'll just plug that in. See, I like to put that underneath the wiring harness. There, a nice spot for it. All right. Now let's turn her on, give her a go. Got our red light. Green light. OLED's working. Sound's working great. High X. Rapid. And it's working perfectly. All right. So let's get her together. So to insert the battery, actually, let's do this in order. Let's do the top. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to be a little careful about this. The OLED wire gets pushed into the top. Make sure it's not folded over. And see how it's actually friction held in there. So that is perfect. Then we're going to take this LED, just kind of push it off to the side. It may get stuck underneath. That's not a big deal. We can pull that up with tweezers. It's usually fine. So I'm going to just take all that I'm going to take the power distribution box and sort of move it up near the top, and then it kind of catches on there. And then I'm going to slide the whole thing forward. I'm going to go slow here. There's no hurry. There we go. Perfect. Well, let's power it on one more time. Make sure everything's working. Yep, shut her off. And now to put the battery in properly, with the power wires facing forward on the battery, just slide it down in there. And then there's plenty of space to access the charging port when you need to charge it. So once you've shoved the battery all the way down in there, you want to make sure the charging cable is facing up. Then you can gently flip the power wires around. You can see that. And just close it up. Just got to make sure that doesn't go over top of the screw hole. And there you go. So if you ever need to charge it, which you obviously will, you can just unscrew that, open it up a bit, and plug the charge port in, and you're ready to go. So we can just put that back down again. And we're going to take this long M3 screw. So final check. Oh, OLED's on the other side. So final check. Try reloading it. Nice. Hot shot. Armor piercing. Stun. I'm going to call that perfect. So let's put the last few parts on, starting with the barrel. Then the top. Oh, we can't do the barrel yet because we didn't put the lens in. Obviously, that's a nice and easy one. So to put the lens in, we're just going to remove the protective coating on that. Drop it in place. Whoops. You got to give it a bit of a push. It's deliberately a little hard to set in because nothing is more annoying than a rattly lens. Okay, and then put the retainer in. The retainer also should be very difficult to push in. A lot of people complain to me, why is it so hard to put together? But then if it rattles, even more people complain to me because nothing is more annoying than a rattly prop. So I make everything extremely tight tolerances because you can always sand it down if it doesn't work for you, but it's very difficult to add material back on after the fact. So now we're going to add the front cowl and screw that on. Now, another thing is it may not line up absolutely perfectly with the threading with the barrel. The easy thing to do is back it out, get your M4 tap, and then just re-tap it with the barrel in. I do this especially with the metal barrels. It's much, much better to re-tap it when it's all in context and it's all in place. So I'm just going to line it up extremely carefully. There we go, nice and flat. Point of note that the cowl does touch the caddy on the inside. These two screws actually serve to cinch that caddy down as well. So just make sure that you're pushing down a little bit, just gently like I am, to make sure it all goes down flush. Wow, this feels like a journey of 1,000 miles. Last screw. Let's take a look at that. Let's try to drop the magazine. Comes in and out very smoothly. Perfect. And we're going to be going and cutting a metal barrel for this and then weathering the one on the shelf behind me. So let's go. I'm going to show you how to do it without any blueprints or special measuring. So first thing I've got is my 3D print of my barrel. That is 61.5 roughly. So I'm gonna, this should be the right one here. Loosen up my tailstock. I'm going to use this spacer in here to keep it centered in the tailstock. And then I'm going to use my 4-jaw chuck here to hold it in place. Now, I much prefer 4-jaw chucks to 3-jaw chucks due to their precision, but I will be the first to admit they are far more of a pain in the butt to line up. So I'm going to open it up to roughly where I think the barrel is, diameter-wise, to get this started. And there we go. That looks good. So you take a marker and then give it a little bit more. And that is how much I want to chop off. Anyone who's a real machinist is probably cringing at my lack of accuracy. But to be honest, you'll see when it's done, this works pretty darn well. For me, anyway. Just going to move this in. I'm just going to try to cut a nice little line. And now aluminum tends to gum up pretty easily, so I'm just going to put a little drop of 3-in-1 oil on there. Just about ready to go. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bore it out. I'm going to do that by measuring the interior diameter here. And yes, I do have a micrometer. It is not necessary for this kind of cutting. 24.5. I'm going to tighten it up there. And then I am going to grab my boring bit. I have kind of a double-ended bit for this, my cutting and boring bit. There we go. Now that's set up for boring. And so I've got 24.5. And then I'm going to go in there and I have 23.6. This should be 24 actually. Supposed to be 24 inner diameter. 23.2. So just wiggle it around and just get the very, very tips in. And what do we got? 23.8. There. And now how far do I need to go in? I can do that by checking the plunge here, and that gives me 17. Whoop. 17 exactly. So I'm going to zero that, and I'm going to look for 17. So I think, yeah, it goes in nicely. I'm going to make sure that's not rubbing. Make sure this boring bar is even long enough. Yep, perfect. Okay, and now I'm going to take it in, speed this up by 2 thou, and keep going till I touch it. 2 thou. Hold on, or I'm going the wrong way. What an idiot. I'm used to cutting in with the lathe, not cutting out. So if you're asking yourself how this idiot's ever going to know it is the correct dimension, well, I have here, back it up, the lens that has to go in the barrel. It doesn't go in the barrel, so it needs to be bigger. End of math. Oh, I think we got it. Oh, that is really tight. That's, hold on. The plastic may be folded over it. Take the plastic off, give this. Yep. That's it. We are good. All right, and for this last operation, I will be using a dial caliper, but only because it's easier to keep it at a particular size. I'm not even going to use it as a dial caliper. I'm going to use it as a gauge. So once that's all the way open, lock it in place. Then I'm actually going to measure it against this, as weird as that is, 27.5. And the measurement I got here is 27.5. All works out. Now I know I'm taking this real tight to the chuck, but I am cheap, and I found on metal, if I get very close to the chuck, I can get more barrels out of a piece of aluminum. And so where did I want to go again? I wanted to go to, this is 28.2, and I am going to 27.6. So I'm not, or 27.5. I'm not taking a lot off. Every 4 thou is roughly 0.1 of a millimeter, so I'm good for about 3 or 4 passes until I gotta check her out. I'm well aware it's not absolutely perfectly centered. It is not gonna matter. That's only at the back. And to be honest, I cut the other inset in the back, also off center. See how it evens up as it goes forward? That should be all she wrote. Very nice surface finish. Oh yeah, there we go. Yep, that's it. So now here is the amazing measuring tool yet again. And keep in mind that the bottom of a cutoff blade is usually a couple thou wider. So I am going to take it all the way in. Oh, yeah, make sure I can feel that ridge there. The ridge is gone. And there we go. Now for that last little lip, I can go grab my chamfering tool. There. So to clean up that little bit on the top, I mean, you can almost clean it up by hand, but I like to use my handy dandy chamfering tool. There, and just run around the edge a little bit, very gently. Perfect. And now I don't know if you've seen on a real firearm, but they do something called crowning, which is a slight chamfer on the very top of the barrel. So that way if the barrel gets any nicks, it's not going to actually affect the accuracy of the weapon. So this little chamfer job at the end actually very much simulates what would happen on a real firearm when you recrowned it. So I'm just going to go around, make it really, really smooth, and then I will polish the inside later. And otherwise, let's move on over to the milling machine. Okay, we actually do have one more lathe operation, very simple one. We are going to cut the aluminum pin. And we're going to do that by feeding this through. So this is going to be a really easy one, because what we're going to do is try to match this milling bit. And this one is 5/16. Of course, it can't be logical. 5/16 is 7.8 millimeter, and this is 8 millimeter bar. So we should have 7.8 millimeter. We want this to, well, 7.9 actually. So we got to take this down the teeniest little bit. And that is all we got to do before we cut it off. Perfect. The last thing I'm going to do with it is add a nice little chamfer. I'm going to do that by positioning my bit at 45 degrees roughly, backing it out. And then just coming in and adding a bit of a chamfer to it. Should be all it needs. Love it. Okay, so now I believe the hole is oh, I should really check that. I believe the recess for it is 4 millimeters. I'm gonna just go measure that quickly back in half a sec. So it's 3.5 millimeters actually. There, that is that. Now I'm going to show you how you can cut all of the slots in this using an easy 1, 2, 3 3D printed template. Starting with 1, we're just going to undo these screws. So I'm going to show you how you can do this as easy as 1, 2, 3 using these 3D printed templates. First thing we're going to do is drop this in and put the 1 on. Now this has the cut end at the back, the thinner end. Just screw this down. There's 2 notches at the back to index to. And I'm going to put in a 3.5 millimeter bit. That's the drill out for an M4. Okay, so I'm going to load up the 3.5 millimeter bit into my chuck. All right, so the next thing to do is cut the slot. We'll be cheating a little bit and using my DRO, but I don't have to. So if you're doing this without a DRO, you can simply go from one end to the other, actually. But with the DRO, it's a lot easier. We're just going to go until we hit -10 here. And that's it. Step 1 is done. Now let's take that out from 1 and stick it in the 2. It's very paint by numbers as far as machining goes. And let's put that in its spot. Hey, there we go. Locked perfectly in place. Best thing about this is we are already indexed, should be already indexed for doing the other one, because it should lock in exactly in place. And we should be able to go straight down, and it's right in the slot. All right, now I can just quickly switch up with the 3.5 mil. So very, very slow, so we don't deflect the bit. And then I'm going to take this out again so we can tap it. We're on to the very last step on our metal barrel. So to load this up, there you can see the 2 screw holes. Only one of them will lock in with this side. So make sure you've got the right way and the fact that it'll work. Okay, gotta get that, there we go, snapped in. I'm gonna set it on there and go right near the back. See it's falling over, move just a teensy bit. Get my little itty bitty machinist square, just make sure that is perfect. I have no movement whatsoever. And then I would normally use a 3mm, and I've got a 3mm here, but I'm going to have to use one of my funky Imperial 7/64, which is slightly off, but almost exactly a 3mm, because my 3mm bit isn't deep enough to cut the slot. It only goes 3/4 of the way in. So it's intended to be 3mm. So last thing I'm going to do is add a personal touch to this. Just going to clip down this aluminum plate. Secure this with a bit of painter's tape. Doesn't have to be super well held down, but if it shifts at all, then this is garbage. So I'm going to make sure this is a little bit secure. Then I'm going to slide this down a bit. Get that nice and parallel. And add some double-sided sticky tape. There, I'm going to take an ultra-fine finishing pad. Just give this a bit of a buff. There, I'm going to start with my engraving bit, do the engraving pass. So let's just go 0 this. Absolutely perfect. And that's it, all done. Now trying not to stab myself under the fingernail. Gently pry this off. Now to install this, we're going to have to drill out the hole so it'll fit the pin, and then also clear the paint out of the way. So we're going to start with this 5/16 drill bit, which is the diameter of our hole, very, very vertically, and just breezing this. Trying not to dig in too hard because it will damage it. I'm just going to carefully go till I hit the bottom there. And I'm going to switch it with the milling bit so I can flatten it out. Drill bits have a taper on the end, so if I use the drill bit the whole way, it would end up tapering the whole thing. So drill bit's a great starter. I'm going to go backwards to make sure I'm in the hole. Now go forwards until, whoops, tighten that up, until I've scraped the bottom flat. I'm going to take the tiniest bit of super glue, I'm going to dop it on here. There, I'm talking so thin, even that's too much. I'm just going to dab it on the paper towel. Don't need a lot to hold it in place. Work that in, and that is press fit in place with a tiny bit of glue to make sure it doesn't work itself loose. So that is now installed. And now to do the plate, I'm going to remove the magazine in a second, but first I've got to clear that out. I'm going to glue the plate in where it says Lawgiver here. And to do that, I've got to scrape that down to the bare plastic. Otherwise, it's not going to adhere properly. Just trying to get a channel started. It's a bit tapered. The last thing I want is for it to ride up on the taper. Ooh, just about there. See the bare plastic? This is nervous work after all this. Let's give that a try and see how good of a fit it is. That looks like the ticket to me. So now let's remove the magazine plate and the battery. And I'm going to take a small drop of super glue on 2 of the ends. Whoa, a little there. That is more than enough. I'm going to spread it along the whole length of this. Too much glue on this would cause some squeeze out, which would be devastating because it will immediately deface the finish. See, the problem with matte finish is that everything shows up on matte finish. I have a hate-hate relationship with matte finish. Oh, and I stuck it on the gloves. That's okay, but now I got to remember, got super glue on the gloves. It's nice and clean. And down she goes. Okay, make sure I get that super glue off. And then from the right side, okay, and then from the left side. I'm going to take that off just because I think it's got some residue on it. Replace it. Oh, wow, I can't get this on. My hand's so sticky from the other glove. Ugh. Get on! Ugh. Good enough. While I'm faffing about, this glue is fast drying, so never forget when working with super glue to put a fan on it. The fumes will actually damage paint around it. And you can solve that just by blowing air over it and keeping it moving. So I'm going to give this about 20 minutes and we'll change the barrel and get this done. Let's give this all a final check. Oh, right, I got to switch the barrel. That was almost a big mistake. We'll slide in this beautiful metal barrel, again, made by Beaks Builds. The link to his video making these barrels is in the description. Don't forget to check that out. Giving a little bit of pressure, because remember I'm going from plastic into metal. Not a lot of pressure, but I want to make sure it doesn't bite against the metal and strip the plastic. Now we've got this all together, let's do a final feature check. First, we're going to do ID fail. That's not holding the trigger. Then ID pass. That is holding the trigger. And let's give it one shot on each mode. Hot shot. Incendiary. Armor piercing. Full metal. Rapid. Try reloading. And finally, magazine comes in and out and back in. And this is good to go. I will be doing the weathering and then finally beauty shots, but I'll be doing that with the Lawgiver for my good buddy and pals Toy Traders, which is the last Lawgiver of the run, because this one needs to go into the mail right now. So I've got a box ready for it. This is a custom-made Lawgiver holder I made on the CNC. Took 3 CNC jobs to cut it out and put it together. It fits the Lawgiver perfectly. Putting it in very gently. And then, still a little bit of shavings on this. Did this on the CNC too. They're surprisingly useful devices. This is an individual number card for the Props 3D Lawgiver run on the RPF. Gonna get my paint marker. Place that gently in here. Sure, right? Yep. This is number 9. I'm gonna sign it. Oops. I have to put this in first. There's a slot for it. That's the suppressor.
charger. And I am off to the post office. I'll be back shortly and we'll weather up the Toy Traders Lawgiver, completing the RPF run. So now Adam Savage's is safely shipped out. Here we are about 2 weeks later, and I have another one done. This is for my good friends over at Toy Traders, the world's best toy store. And I don't just say that because a lot of the Props 3D models are on display in the back. Google it. Their displays are incredible. But for now, while we have this one, let's see what it can do.
This belongs to me. Dismissed.
Sorry about that false ending there. Craig was in town, had one done. What am I going to do? So the Toy Traders one is off. Actually, all the ones for the run is off, and a significant amount of time has passed. It was weeks of filming, followed by weeks of editing, and at the same time, there was months of making the lawgivers for the run, not to mention all the development time at the beginning. This is completely unsustainable. So let's go through the weathering supplies. I'm not going to use all of these. Weathering tells a story. It tells a story of where you are and where you've been. And for that, I'd just like to show you some of my supplies and then what I'm going to go with, which is only a couple of these for the Dredd run. So Dredd takes place in Mega City 1, which is a dusty, arid, dirty city. I have a lot of these weathering powders, which I find pretty much applies to everything. But we need to find a powder in here. They range from, rust colors, which work great for space environments, to very light sandy colors, which are great for deserts, especially this one here. Or, the good old Fuller's Earth itself. This stuff you can just use and be done with it. So I'm going to pick for Mega City 1 some kind of mid-tones. A new rust, which is sort of a mid-tone. And then I need a lighter one. Dark yellow ochre. These two, done. Now, oils are a great thing to use for weathering. They really help this weathering powder stick, and especially on things like guns and blasters, they just make it look, lived with and used. Let's see, washes are a very light paint you can apply kind of over your oil to do a little discoloration. Probably also a little bit of a dirty dark yellow. I grab myself a little sponge, which I can use to simulate streaks and also get into little corners. I've got a really dirty old chip brush, which I can use to schmutz everything around with, especially good for applying powders. Nice little paintbrush for, small little details. And then to do all of the metal, I'm going to use these very hard Q-tips along with my favorite single weathering tool, which is Rub and Buff. And I think that's all we need aside from gloves. The thing with weathering is that you're trying to simulate use. So wearing a pair of gloves while you're weathering and actually handling it is a good facsimile for how somebody would actually handle things, how dust would be brushed aside. So I think it's a critical part of the process. Just bring our lawgiver over and just quickly separate the metal parts from the non-metal parts. So the cowl on top is metal. Get these off. Then I should be able to pull the barrel. And then I think that's good. I'm going to take the magazine out so I can do that separately. Otherwise, I'm just going to leave it fully intact. So let's move the metal parts over there, starting with a little powder. So this isn't going to stick very well, which is totally fine. I'm just going to work it in. It's going to spill below. That's totally fine as well. Try to get it in the lettering. Be careful to be too aggressive or it creates a little cloud, which I'm going to blow away. Anything that falls off, just put it in there. And yes, I'm even going to get the screen a tiny bit dirty, especially in the logo here. Move it up. right, now we're just gonna roll it all over with our hands, actually handle it, then try to brush it off onto here. As you get dust and dirt on your stuff, you kind of want to brush it off. Yes, this is very aggressive. It will be much better in a second. On the front. All right. Now, we're going to rub it off. Be very aggressive about rubbing it off too. It's important to make sure your paint is pretty well cured before you do this and top coated. So I'm just going to look for spots where it didn't get in. So I'm rubbing along the edges and I'm not trying to rub the corners very hard. I'll just push it in with my fingers and grab my little paintbrush here, dab it in. Starting with the lightest color first and then building layers up on top of it. Now the screen, try to clean that off pretty good. This stuff will clean it up much better, the shop towel. I'm not trying to obscure the screen too much. Make sure I get that into the corners. There, well, it's a little heavy in there, so I'm just gonna brush it out. Nice and used. Okay, this one's clearly done. Throw it out. At a certain point, you're just spreading it around, trying to make it look used, not pulled out of a dumpster. There we go. See, some nice edging around the grip. I really like that. It makes it look used and handled. I may forego a wash just in favor of a little black. Now this is disgusting, but important. It's also important you be very careful with it too. You want a little bit of oil and grease, but not too much. So I'm actually going to apply it directly. Yeah, it's going to take off some of that dust. We'll reapply it. And let's just think of where did you get that if I was handling it? Probably definitely on the trigger a little bit. Oil and grease in there, a little up front. Just a little bit. It really just discolors the finish. See, especially in the slide here. Like you definitely have to oil that as you were using it. Then, and this is a cool part, it gets on your hands. It's going to work it in, make it look like a used item. I may come back to this, we'll see how it looks. For a bit of age and a bit of contrast. I've got a much browner color. So I'm going to be even more careful with. I'm going to use a Q-tip for this. Yeah, this is going to, using it in dirty hallways and holstering it with grime. It'll get a lot of brownish grease and grub in there that's been mixed in with dirt. Now, handle it with my grubby hands again. Doing the same thing yet again. Get it in there a bit. There, it's looking very nice. See maybe a little bit in the logo. Model it up a bit. Really try to drag that out. You know what, this is also too light. I'm gonna get a darker one. We're going into hallways. A little of the old rust is probably better for the next layer. Mix it in with that lighter color. And we're not being subtle with this. A little on the screen. There. And the mag, well, I didn't do a lot in there. Okay, so, oh, I forgot the magazine. I'll do that as its own thing in a minute. A little in here. It's a lot, actually. Tip the rest off. That's definitely enough of that. Smush it in. And now this absolutely disgusting cloth, I'm gonna give it a wipe down. It's your field clean. Remove all this dust and dirt we just applied. Because now we're going back. We want to show a clean weapon. As clean as we can get it after all this hard use. actually dig in there now, try to get it out. It's got some awesome contrast on the logo there. Now I'm going to get an even cleaner cloth, give it a rub down. You can see that most of what we're putting on is coming off, but it's sticking in the corners and the edges, making that text stand out. And then from here, it's a little bit subjective. Like, how old do you want it? I want mine pretty old. Rubbing with the oil took that out a little too much. It also sticks to the oil, so reapplying it. I don't want to give it a wash. Wash takes off a lot of the powder. It adds a lot of weathering, but I actually like the pattern the way it is and how the oils kind of discolored it a bit. So I'm going to leave it like this and move on to the magazine and repeat the same process, just a little faster. Put it in the windows, get it out of the windows. Now, I don't think I want it on, why not? A little on the windows in the bottom corner. Let's get a little black line there. Same thing as before, just a few little drops wherever I think it could go. Should be more up in the middle. Actually, that's so filthy. I'm going to put the other one over top. I'm picking up as much as I'm taking off, especially on the windows. All right, little drabs and dibs just like before. There, mix that in with powder. Handle it, make sure everything's been handled here. Think about weathering too, it's hard to screw up. You're trying to make it look old. I mean, if you don't like the way it looks, just keep going over it and over it and over it and over it. And each time it'll get a little older, a little nastier, a little more realistic. Actually, I don't think I did enough around the back edge. There. Give it a nice rub down. And be careful when you clean these windows too. If you just rub them out there, it'll leave an uneven edge. You just want to kind of model it, tap it, see if that matches. I think that matches quite well. And as before, get our nice one, a shop towel, and give it a bit of a scrub and a cleanup. See how these gloves are getting? That's perfect. Filthy, dirty judge hands. Handle a field-used lawgiver. Oh, I love it. Get a close-up later, but I'm going to call that done. Am I going to top coat this? No, it's weathered. And as I handle it and play with it, it'll get more weathered, and then I can always re-weather it. I love the look and the feel of a well-weathered prop. So our hard Q-tips, I'm going to blowtorch them. And this will make all that fuzziness go away. There. So we're going to take a little bit of rub and buff. We're going to rub it here, and we're going to roll this Q-tip in it. There we go. So we're trying to get an even coating, but very, very thin. I'm going to keep rolling it off. You see, when metal gets rubbed, it goes bare, but it usually only goes bare on the corners. If I use a lot of rub and buff, it's just going to create this really disgusting, unrealistic edge to this. I'm just looking for a subtle weathering. So I'm scratching it. I'm just going right at the edge, scratching it on. That's making it look like real aged metal. And that's it for that. Now the top, we've got to be really subtle with. We're just going to rub it, and it's going to make this ugly, unrealistic blob. We're going to polish that in, and that's going to slowly start to look like worn metal. It's probably rubbed on the top of the site. You still have to remember to tell the story. One thing when I look at a prop that's been just randomly weathered is, you know, it doesn't tell the correct story. This sight has been taken in and out of the holster over and over, which has caused the metal on the top to just wear down, but not areas like here in the front where it wouldn't have touched. Especially the side would have been worn. These two edges would have been worn. Very, very subtle. Go along the edge. And this will also rub off as you're handling it too, so be a little careful. This I will probably seal in with a very light top coat later, which will take off some of the weathering I'm about to apply. So it may require 1 or 2 passes. Weathering is always to taste, you know? So I'm going to do all the parts that would have touched through holster use, general wear and tear. You know, there's even some wear that comes from cleaning it, you know? There. There. We'll just do the edge there and around the crown. I mean, the irony here, this is real metal. So, like, I could probably just sand it down, but I find this actually looks better and is somewhat reversible. Another thing you can do here too, which is a bit hard, put a little bit on, then rub it in a circular motion until it's all gone. Then even use it, and that's going to create a nice little fade to look like it's been worn away a bit. I think that's all that needs. So I'm going to do the whole top here and then wear it off. That way that subtle judge's shield is going to look awesome. That's it for the sight. I don't want to get too aggressive. Okay, so metal wear tends to be fairly even, so you want to make sure that all the thicknesses are pretty much the same as you go, and that there's no kind of streaks, because those will nail it as fake weathering. Just got to do around the edge. There, I think that looks great. Okay, so I'm going to do both of these. Just tap it on. I want to be more subtle with this. I'm going to do both at the same time too. You're probably screaming that I'm mixing the two together, but so what? I'm weathering. This is my weathering powders. Not supposed to be perfect. That's it. That's it for that. I don't want, I may do a little black, but I don't want to do a lot. See, there's a bunch of mixed powder over here. The weathering on this is going to be more subtle than the body. No paper towel with this one because it will take off all of that metal we did. I'm just tapping it around. That's as far as I'm going to go with that. Same with here. Done. And that is, I believe, weathered. Let's put it together and see how it looks. I'm going to give it another handling. And that is that. Let's turn it on, shall we? Awesome. Get all this cleaned up in a couple of final words. Thank you all for joining me on this journey. I hope you learned something, and I especially hope this has inspired you to build, or you are following along and building your own. A massive thanks to Craig for his endless hours in making this possible, writing the code, debugging issues. It was an incredible effort all around. And thank you to Paul, or Beaks from Beaks Builds, for machining the beautiful barrels and triggers used in this run. And dude, you've inspired me. I now have a lathe and a milling machine and all that wonderful stuff to do it myself. And as you can saw earlier, actually gave it a shot. A huge shout out and thank you to those from the RPF who supported this build and purchased a Lawgiver of their own. I'd also like to say too, that this was probably my one and only RPF run. You know, I really loved building these and sharing them with you, but building 20 of them, at this kind of quality took me months. So I think as of this video, I am changing tact. I love teaching you how to do this stuff. I love getting my hands dirty and figuring it out. The repetitive process is not something I can do and keep bringing you new models. I mean, in the meantime, I've modeled the Auto 9 from RoboCop, which is actually a functional light gun. Craig and Beaks are working with me on that one. Hope to bring it to you soon. Even made this into a modern light gun as well, which is pretty cool. And we've got the E11, the SE14R, the Mando Blaster, the Aliens Pulse Rifle, the interactive R2-D2. I know this is an R5, there's an R2 in the other room as well. This is a mod. And lightsabers, a ton more. So in that vein, I'm actually announcing that I'm going to try the Patreon route and just see if I can find enough kind souls in the world to help fund these wonderful projects. Right now it's a big out-of-pocket expense and time, but I'm not stopping doing it. I'd like to give a personal thanks and shout out to the first two supporters of the Props3D Patreon. We have Sean D from the RPF. Thank you, kind sir. Your donations are already being put to good use. And Paul Beaks, you didn't have to, man. You're part of the family already, but thank you. It's much appreciated. If you do want to join the Props3D Patreon, there's a link in the description below. I'm not really giving anything special to anybody who donates. All these projects are free. I don't want to gate anything, but any donations will be used directly to bringing more projects to you as fast as humanly possible. So thank you all, and until next time.